Hello! Today I will share with you my process connecting body corrective blend shapes to a custom Metahuman made with Metapipe. I am by no means an expert in Unreal, nor this topic, but just want to share what worked. Please feel free to correct me or share any relevant tips or tricks. To start, this is the default post-process animation blueprint, which comes downloaded when you import a Metahuman from Quixelbridge, and its body type matches it. I used it as a base and a guide for my corrective poses. There are 2 control rigs, along with many pose driver nodes. I believe both of them create corrective shapes by moving corrective joints during joint rotations. However, I found that the first control rig is responsible for most of the corrective deformation. You can test their effects by toggling the alpha value or bypassing pose driver node, then hitting compile. For my workflow, I used a custom version of this control rig and edited pose drivers. For the pose drivers, I chose which poses to correct, made my custom corrective blend shape for it, then set that pose target to drive my custom corrective. There are many here, so you can choose which targets to correct and delete the rest. As for the control rig, I edited the values here to minimize the effect of single-axis rotations while keeping its twist rotation effect. You can see what I mean here. Switching it on and off makes almost no difference to arm Y-only or Z-only rotations. But there's still its corrective effect on X rotation. You can copy these values and experiment for yourself. For example, the twist values influence how the limbs deform during twist rotation. The reason for editing the control rig is because if you use the original version, along with custom blend shapes, their effects will be compounded, thus not giving you your corrective shape. On the other hand, without it, just using pose driver blend shapes didn't fix the poor twist rotation of the upper arm, hand, and thigh. Now I'll go through the workflow step by step. First, at Metapipe's end stage, just before export, you have a combined LOD mesh with the same skinning as your body and head meshes. You can export either this or the body FBX to use as a working mesh for your correctives. I chose the combined, then later split the blend shape into head and body. But if you aren't making clavicle or upper arm correctives, then it's probably easier to just use the body. The reason for exporting the FBX is, in this scene, there is an RBF solver adding corrective deformation on top of the skinned mesh, similar to Unreal's post-process animation blueprint. However, we want to add the corrective blend shapes to a linear skinned mesh. Import the combined mesh FBX into a new Maya scene. This skinned mesh will be the working mesh for the correctives. It deforms the same as your Metahuman in Unreal without any corrective animation blueprint. I tested this by posing it in Maya and in Unreal, then exported and compared both in ZBrush. Side note, I used a custom control rig to pose it in Unreal, as the sequencer control rig may add posture shift or limb distortion. I'll link the tutorial on how to make this control rig. To attach the correctives to the skinned mesh, we can use Brave Rabbit's Free Shapes plugin. I'll use upper arm forward 90 as an example. Pose the mesh, here it's Z-90, then make its corrective shape. I exported it to ZBrush for sculpting, but the Shapes plugin also lets you make correctives directly in Maya. To attach the blend shape, load the skinned mesh into Brave Rabbit's Shapes plugin. Next, select the corrective sculpt, then add it as pose target. You can test that it works as intended. If you get a spiky mesh, it probably means the sculpt's vertex order isn't matching the skinned mesh. To correct it, simply export the skinned mesh's obj and transfer your sculpt's shape to it via transfer attributes, with UV as the space. Metapipe also has a tutorial on this. Now that the blend shape is correctly set to Metahuman default position, we can split it to head and body. You can use any method, but I use ZBrush group by UVs, then export the head and body separately. Return to the Metapipe export stage scene and add these meshes as blend shapes. From my experience, the body mesh will have a different vertex order, so just repeat the previous transfer vertex order process. Make sure the blend shape name for both head and body is the same, so that they will get triggered together. When done, hit Metapipe's Export button. In Unreal, if your custom Metahuman was already imported before, you can just select your head and body skeletal meshes and re-import. The Corrective Blendshapes should appear under the Morph Target panel, but you may need to reopen the Assets Editor window to refresh it. To get your custom Blendshapes working correctly, make sure to watch Metapipe's Expression Blendshapes tutorial, Part 4, Expressions Mesh Normals Fix. There are several settings that must be changed for both head and body. To input the blend shape into the pose driver, you must first switch the drive output from poses to curves. I also cleared the pose asset just in case. Since this pose target's cone values are already set to activate at forward 90, there's no need to calibrate them. Just copy the name of your blend shape and set it as the driven curve. You can test that it's working correctly in Sequencer or using the Custom Ctrl Rig mentioned earlier. I found that increasing the pose driver radius can help smoothen pose transitions in many cases. But if you ever want to add an in-between pose target, for example, an upper arm forward 45, it's very simple. Add a new pose target and set it to drive that blend shape. To calibrate the cone angle, pose the arm to forward 45, using the Custom Ctrl Rig. Then adjust the cone values till it gets fired to the maximum. Note that adding more targets can add unwanted jitter or popping between each target, so I recommend adding more only if necessary. For blend shapes you want to drive with a single axis rotation, such as elbow or knee, you can also use a bone-driven controller. Here, I've used it to restore volume to the upper arm, which shrinks during twist X rotations. I'll add a link to the tutorial where I learnt this from. From here, it's just repeating the steps for whichever poses you wish to correct. There are also some things I didn't cover here, such as using 2 source bones to drive your blend shapes. It's a little complicated to set up, so perhaps I'll make another tutorial if you're interested. Have fun with your pose corrections.